Watching the boys vanish away, Charles Holloway suppressed a sudden urge to run with them, make the pack. He knew what the wind was doing to them, where it was taking them, to all the secret places that were never so secret again in life. Somewhere in him a shadow turned mournfully over. You had to run with a night like this, so the sadness could not hurt. Look, he thought, Will runs because running is its own excuse. Jim runs because something's up ahead of him. Yet strangely, they do run together. What's the answer, he wondered, walking through the library, putting out the lights, putting out the lights, putting out the lights. Is it all in the whirls on our thumbs and fingers? Why are some people all grasshopper fiddlings, scrapings, all antennae, shivering? One big ganglion, eternally nodding, slip-nodding, square-nodding themselves. They stoke a furnace all their lives, sweat their lips, shine their eyes, and start it all in the crib. Caesar's lean and hungry friends. They eat the dark, who only stand and breathe. That's Jim, all bramble hair and itchweed. And Will, why, he's the last peach, high on a summer tree. Some boys walk by and you cry seeing them. They feel good, they look good, they are good. Oh, they're not above peeing off a bridge or stealing an occasional dime store pencil sharpener. It's not that. It's just, seeing them pass. That's how they'll be all their life. They'll get hit, hurt, cut, bruised, and always wonder why. Why does it happen? How can it happen to them? But Jim, now he knows it happens. He watches for it happening. He sees it start. He sees it finish. He licks the wound he expected, and he never asks why. He knows. He always knew. Someone knew before him, a long time ago. Someone who had wolves for pets and lions for night conversants. Hell, Jim doesn't know with his mind, but his body knows. And while Will's putting a bandage on his latest scratch, Jim's ducking, weaving, bouncing away from the knockout blow which must inevitably come. So there they go, Jim running slower to stay with Will, Will running faster to stay with Jim. Jim breaking 2 windows in a haunted house because Will's along. Will breaking 1 window instead of none because Jim's watching. God, how we get our fingers in each other's clay. That's friendship. Each playing the potter to see what shapes we can make of the other. Jim, Will, he thought, strangers. Go on. I'll catch up someday. The library door gasped open, slammed. 5 minutes later, he turned into the corner saloon for his nightly one and only drink, in time to hear a man say, I read when alcohol was invented, the Italians thought it was the big thing they'd been looking for centuries. The elixir of life. Did you know that? No. The bartender's back was turned. Sure, the man went on. Distilled wine, 9th, 10th century. Looked like water. But it burnt. I mean, it not only burnt the mouth and stomach, but you could set it on fire. So they thought they'd mix water and fire. Fire water, the elixir vitae. By God, maybe they weren't so far wrong thinking it was the cure-all, the thing that worked miracles. Have a drink? I don't need it, said Holloway, but someone inside me does. Who? The boy I once was, thought Holloway, who runs like the leaves down the sidewalk autumn nights. But he couldn't say that. So he drank, eyes shut, listening to hear if that thing inside turned over again, rustling in the deep bonds that were stacked for burning, but never burned. Chapter 4. Will stopped. Will looked at the Friday night town. It seemed when the first stroke of 9 banged from the big courthouse clock, all the lights were on and business humming in the shops. But by the time the last stroke of 9 shook everyone's fillings in his teeth, the barbers had yanked off the sheets. powdered the customers, trotted them forth. The druggist's fount had stopped fizzing like a nest of snakes. The insect neons everywhere had ceased buzzing, and the vast glittering acreage of the dime store, with its 10 billion metal, glass, and paper oddments waiting to be fished over, suddenly blacked out. Shades slithered, doors boomed, keys rattled their bones in locks. People fled with hordes of torn newspaper, mice nibbling their heels. Bang, they were gone. "Boy," yelled Will, "folks run like they thought the storm was here." "It is," shouted Jim. "Us." They stomped, pounded, thundered over iron gates, steel trap doors, past a dozen unlit shops, a dozen half-lit, a dozen dying dark. The city was dead as they rounded the United Cigar Store corner to see a wooden Cherokee glide in darkness by himself. "Hey!" Mr. Tetley, the proprietor, peered over the Indian's shoulders. "Scare you boys?" "Naw." But Will shivered, feeling cold tidal waves of strange rain moving down the prairie as on a deserted shore. When the lightning nailed the town, he wanted to be layered under 16 blankets and a pillow. "Mr. Tetley," said Will quietly, for now there were 2 wooden Indians upright in ripe tobacco darkness. Mr. Tetley, amidst his jest, had frozen mouth open listening. "Mr. Tetley," he heard something far away on the wind, but couldn't say what it was. The boys backed off. He did not see them. He did not move. He only listened. They left him. They ran. In the 4th empty block from the library, the boys came upon a 3rd wooden Indian. Mr. Crossetti, in front of his barber shop, his door key in his trembling fingers, did not see them stop. What had stopped them? A teardrop. It moved shining down Mr. Crossetti's left cheek. He breathed heavily. "Crossetti, you fool! Something happens! Nothing happens! You cry like a baby." Mr. Crossetti took a trembling breath, snuffing. "Don't you smell it?" Jim and Will sniffed. "Licorice!" "Heck no, cotton candy." "I haven't smelled that in years," said Mr. Crossetti. Jim snorted. "It's around." "Yes, but who notices? When? Now, my nose tells me, breathe, and I'm crying. Why? Because I remember how, a long time ago, boys ate that stuff. Why haven't I stopped to think and smell the last 30 years? "You're busy, Mr. Crossetti," Will said. "You haven't got time." "Time? Time?" Mr. Crossetti wiped his eyes. "Where does that smell come from? There's no place in town sells cotton candy. Only circuses." "Hey," said Will, "that's right." Well, Crossetti is done crying. The barber blew his nose and turned to lock his shop door. As he did this, Will watched the barber pole whirl its red serpentine up out of nothing, leading his gaze around, rising to vanish into more nothing. On countless noons, Will had stood there trying to unravel that ribbon, watch it come, go, end without ending. Mr. Crossetti put his hands to the light switch under the spinning pole. "Don't," said Will, then murmuring, "Don't turn it off." Mr. Crossetti looked at the pole, as if freshly aware of its miraculous properties. He nodded, gently, his eyes soft. "Where does it come from? Where does it go, eh? Who knows? Not you, not him, not me? Oh, the mysteries, by God. So, we'll leave it on." "It's good to know," thought Will. "It'll be running until dawn, winding up from nothing, winding away to nothing while we sleep. Good night." "Good night." And they left him behind in a wind that very faintly smelled of licorice and cotton candy. Chapter 5. Charles Holloway put his hand to the saloon's double swing doors, hesitant, as if the gray hairs on the back of his hand, like antennae, had felt something beyond slide by in the October night. Perhaps great fires burned somewhere, and their furnace blast warned him not to step forth, or another ice age had loomed across the land, Its freezing bulk might already have laid waste 1 billion people in the hour. Perhaps time itself was draining off down an immense glass, with powdered darkness falling after to bury all. Or maybe it was only that man in a dark suit, seen through the saloon window across the street, great paper rolls under one arm, a brush and bucket in his free hand. The man was whistling a tune very far away. It was a tune from another season, one that never ceased making Charles Holloway sad when he heard it. The song was incongruous for October, but immensely moving, overwhelming, no matter what day or what month it was sung. I heard the bells on Christmas Day their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet their words repeat of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Charles Holloway shivered. Suddenly there was the old sense of terrified elation, of wanting to laugh and cry together when he saw the innocents of the earth wandering the snowy streets the day before Christmas, among all the tired men and women whose faces were dirty with guilt, unwashed of sin, and smashed like small windows by life that hit without warning, ran, hid, came back and hid again. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep, God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. The whistling died. Charles Holloway stepped out. Far up ahead, the man who had whistled the tune was motioning his arms by a telegraph pole, silently working. Now he vanished into the open door of a shop. Charles Holloway, not knowing why, crossed the street to watch the man pasting up one of the posters inside the unrented and empty store. Now the man stepped out of the door with his brush, his paste bucket, his rolled papers, his eyes, a fierce and lustful shine, fixed on Charles Holloway. Smiling, he gestured an open hand. Holloway stared. The palm of that hand was covered with fine black silken hair. It looked like the hand clenched tight. It waved. The man swept around the corner. Charles Holloway, stunned, flushed with sudden summer heat, swayed, then turned to gaze into the empty shop. 2 sawhorses stood parallel to each other under a single spotlight. Placed over these 2 sawhorses, like a funeral of snow and crystal, was a block of ice 6 feet long. It shone dimly with its own effulgence, and its color was light green-blue. It was a great cool gem resting there in the dark. On a little white placard at one side near the window, the following calligraphic message could be read by lamplight. Cougar and Dark's Pandemonium Shadow Show. Fantocini, Marionette Circus, and your Plain Meadow Carnival. Arriving immediately. Here on display, one of our many attractions, the most beautiful woman in the world. Holloway's eyes leaped to the poster on the inside of the window. The most beautiful woman in the world. And back to the cold, long block of ice. It was such a block of ice as he remembered from traveling magician shows when he was a boy, when the local ice company contributed a chunk of winter, in which for 12 hours on end, frost maidens lay embedded on display, while people watched and comedies toppled down the raw white screen and coming attractions came and went, and at last the pale ladies slid forth, all rhymed, chipped free by perspiring sorcerers, to be led off smiling into the dark behind the curtains. The most beautiful woman in the world! And yet this vast chunk of wintry glass held nothing but frozen river water. No, not quite empty. Holloway felt his heart pound one special time. Within the huge winter gem, was there not a special vacuum, a voluptuous hollow, a prolonged emptiness which undulated from tip to toe of the ice? And wasn't this vacuum, this emptiness waiting to be filled with summer flesh, was it not shaped somewhat like a woman? Yes, the ice and the lovely hollows, the horizontal flow of emptiness within the ice, the lovely nothingness, the exquisite flow of an invisible mermaid, daring the ice to capture it. The ice was cold. The emptiness within the ice was warm. He wanted to go away from there. But Charles Holloway stood in the strange night for a long time, looking in an empty shop, and the two sawhorses, and the cold waiting Arctic coffins set there, like a vast star of India in the dark. Chapter 6. Jim Nightshade stopped at the corner of Hickory and Main, breathing easily, his eyes fixed tenderly on the leafy darkness of Hickory Street. Will? No. Will stopped, surprised at his own violence. It's just there, the fifth house. Just 1 minute, Will, Jim pleaded softly. Minute? Will glanced down the street, which was the street of the theater. Until this summer it had been an ordinary street where they stole peaches, plums, and apricots each in its day. But late in August, while they were monkey climbing for the sourest apples, the thing happened, which changed the houses, the taste of the fruits, and the very air within the gossiping trees. Will, it's waiting. Maybe something's happening, hissed Jim. Maybe something is. Will swallowed hard and felt Jim's hand pinch his arm. For it was no longer the street of apples or plums or apricots. It was the one house with a window at the side. And this window, Jim said, was a stage with a curtain, the shade, that is, up. And in that room, on that strange stage, were the actors, who spoke mysteries, mouthed wild things, laughed, sighed, murmured. So much of it was whispers. Will did not understand. Just one last time, Will. You know it won't be the last. Jim's face was flushed, his cheeks blazing, his eyes green glass fire. He thought of that night, them picking the apples, Jim suddenly crying softly, "Oh, there!" And Will, hanging to the limbs of the tree, tightly pressed, terribly excited, staring in at the theater, that particular stage where people, all unknowing, flourished shirts above their heads, let fall clothes to the rug, stood raw and animal crazed, naked like shivering horses, hands out to touch each other. What they're doing, thought Will. Why are they laughing? What's wrong with them? What's wrong? He wished the light would go out. But he hung tight to the suddenly slippery tree and watched the bright window theater, heard the laughing, and numb at last, let go, slid, fell, lay dazed, then stood in the dark gazing up at Jim, who still clung to his high limb. Jim's face, heart flushed, cheeks fire fuzzed, lips parted, stared in. Jim, Jim, come down now. But Jim did not hear. Jim! And when Jim looked down at last, he saw Will as a stranger below with some silly request to give off living and come down to earth. So Will ran off, alone, thinking too much, thinking nothing at all, not knowing what to think. Will, please. Will looked at Jim now, with the library books in his hands. We've been to the library, ain't that enough? Jim shook his head. Carry these for me. He handed Will his books and trotted softly under the hissing, whispering trees. 3 houses down, he called back. Will, know what you are? A darned old dimwit Episcopal Baptist. Then Jim was gone. Will seized the books tight to his chest. They were wet from his hands. Don't look back, he thought. I won't. And looking only toward home, he walked away, quickly. Chapter 7. Halfway home, Will felt a shadow breathing hard behind him. Theater closed, said Will, not looking back. Jim walked in silence behind him for a long while and then said, Nobody home. Swell! Jim spat. Darn Baptist preacher, you. And around the corner, a tumbleweed slithered, a great cotton ball of pale paper which bounced, then clung shivering to Jim's legs. Will grabbed the paper, laughing, pulled it off, let it fly. He stopped laughing. The boys, watching the pail throwaway rattle and flit through the trees, were suddenly cold. Wait a minute, said Jim, slowly. All of a sudden they were yelling, running, leaping. Don't tear it, careful. The paper fluttered like a snare drum in their hands. Coming October 24th. Their lips moved, shadowing the words set in Rococo type. Cougar and Darks. Carnival! October 24th. That's tomorrow! It can't be, said Will. All carnivals stop after Labor Day. Who cares? 1001 Wonders, see? Mephistopheles, the Lava Drinker, Mr. Electrico, the Monster Montgolfier. Balloon, said Will. A Montgolfier is a balloon. Mademoiselle Tarot, read Jim. The Dangling Man, the Demon Guillotine, the Illustrated Man. Hey! That's just an old guy with tattoos. No, Jim breathed warm on the paper. He's illustrated. Special, see? Covered with monsters. A menagerie. Jim's eyes jumped. See, the skeleton. Ain't that fine, Will? Not Thin Man, no, but skeleton. See, the Dust Witch. What's a Dust Witch, Will? Dirty old gypsy. No, Jim squinted off, seeing things. A gypsy that was born in the dust, raised in the dust, and someday winds up back in the dust. Here's more. Egyptian mirror maze. See yourself 10,000 times. St. Anthony's Temple of Temptation. The most beautiful, read Will. Woman in the world, finished Jim. They looked at each other. Can a carnival have the most beautiful woman on earth in its sideshow, Will? You ever seen carnival ladies, Jim? Grizzly bears. But how come this handbill claims... Oh, shut up. You mad at me, Will? No, it's just... Get it! The wind had torn the paper from their hands. The handbill blew over the trees and away in an idiot caper. Gone. It's not true anyways, Will gasped. Carnivals don't come this late in the year, silly darn-sounding thing. Who'd go to it? Me. Jim stood quiet in the dark. Me, thought Will, seeing the guillotine flash, the Egyptian mirrors unfold accordions of light, and the sulphur-skinned devil man sipping lava like gunpowder tea. That music, Jim murmured. Calliope. Must be coming tonight. Carnivals come at sunrise. Yeah, but what about the licorice and the cotton candy we smelled? Close? And Will thought of the smells and the sounds flowing on the river of wind from beyond the darkening houses. Mr. Tetley, listening by his wooden Indian friend, Mr. Cassetti with a single tear shining down his cheek, and the barber pole sliding its red tongue up and around forever out of nowhere and away to eternity. Will's teeth chattered. Let's go home. We are home, cried Jim, surprised. For not knowing it, they had reached their separate houses, and now moved up their separate walks. On his porch, Jim leaned over and called softly, Will, you're not mad? Heck no. We won't go by that street, that house, that theater again for a month. A year, I swear. Sure, Jim, sure. They stood with their hands on the doorknobs of their houses, and Will looked up at Jim's roof, where the lightning rod glittered against the cold stars. The storm was coming. The storm wasn't coming. No matter which, he was glad Jim had that grand contraption up there. Night! Night. The separate doors slammed. Chapter 8. Will opened the door and shut it again, quietly this time. That's better, said his mother's voice. Framed through the hall door, Will saw the only theater he cared for now, the familiar stage where sat his father. Home already, he and Jim must have run the long way round, holding a book but reading the empty spaces. In a chair by the fire, Mother knitted and hummed like a tea kettle. He wanted to be near and not near them. He saw them close. He saw them far. Suddenly, they were awfully small, in too large a room, in too big a town, in much too huge a world. In this unlocked place, they seemed at the mercy of anything that might break in from the night. Including me, Will thought. Including me. Suddenly he loved them more for their smallness than he ever had when they seemed tall. His mother's fingers twitched, her mouth counted, the happiest woman he had ever seen. He remembered a greenhouse on a winter day, pushing aside thick jungle leaves to find a creamy pink hothouse, rose poised alone in the wilderness. That was Mother, smelling like fresh milk, happy to herself in this room. Happy? But how and why? Here, a few feet off, was the janitor, the library man, the stranger, his uniform gone, but his face still the face of a man happier at night alone in the deep marble vaults, whispering his broom in the drafty corridors. Will watched, wondering why this woman was so happy and this man so sad. His father stared deep in the fire, one hand relaxed. Half cupped in that hand lay a crumpled paper ball. Will blinked. He remembered the wind blowing the pale handbill skittering into the trees. Now the same color paper lay crushed, its rococo type hidden in his father's fingers. "Hey!" Will stepped into the parlor. Immediately Mom opened a smile that was like lighting a second fire. Dad, stricken, looked dismayed as if caught in a criminal act. Will wanted to say, "Hey, what'd you think of the handbill?" But Dad was cramming the handbill deep in the chair upholstery, and Mother was leafing the library books. "Oh, these are fine, Willie." So Will just stood with the cougar and dark on his tongue and said, "Boy, the wind really flew us home. Street's full of paper blowing." Dad did not flinch at this. "Anything new, Dad?" Dad's hand still lay tucked in the side of the chair. He lifted a gray, slightly worried, very tired gaze to his son. "Stone Lion blew off the library steps. Prowling the town now, looking for Christians. Won't find any. Got the only one in captivity here, and she's a good cook." "Bosh!" said Mom. Walking upstairs, Will heard what he half expected to hear. A soft, fluming sigh as something fresh was tossed on the fire. In his mind, he saw Dad standing at the hearth, looking down as the paper crinkled to ash. Cougar, dark carnival, witch, wonders. He wanted to go back down and stand with Dad, hands out, to be warmed by the fire. Instead, he went slowly up to shut the door of his room. Some nights abed, Will put his ear to the wall to listen, and if his folks talked things that were right, he stayed, and if not right, he turned away. If it was about time and passing years or himself or town or just the general inconclusive way God ran the world, he listened warmly, comfortably, secretly, for it was usually Dad talking. He could not often speak with Dad anywhere in the world, inside or out, but this was different. There was a thing in Dad's voice, up, over, down, easy as a hand winging soft in the air, like a white bird describing flight patterns, made the ear want to follow and the mind's eye to see. And the odd thing in Dad's voice was the sound truth makes being said. The sound of truth, in a wild roving land of city or plain country lies, will spell any boy. Many nights Will drowsed this way, his senses like stopped clocks long before that half-singing voice was still. Dad's voice was a midnight school, teaching deep fathom hours, and the subject was life. So it was this night. Will's eyes shut, head leaned to the cool plaster. At first Dad's voice, a Congo drum, boomed softly, horizons away. Mother's voice, she used her water-bright soprano in the Baptist choir, did not sing, yet sang back replies. Will imagined Dad sprawled talking to the empty ceiling. "Will makes me feel so old. A man should play baseball with his son." "Not necessarily," said the woman's voice kindly. "You're a good man." "In a bad season. Hell, I was 40 when he was born. And you, who's your daughter? People say, God, when you lie down your thoughts turn to mush. Hell." Will heard the shift of weight as Dad sat up in the dark. A match was being struck. A pipe was being smoked. The wind rattled the windows. "Man with posters under his arm. Carnival," said his mother's voice. "This late in the year?" Will wanted to turn away, but couldn't. Most beautiful woman in the world, Dad's voice murmured. Mother laughed softly. You know I'm not. No, thought Will, that's from the handbill. Why doesn't Dad tell? Because, Will answered himself, something's going on. Oh, something is going on. Will saw that paper frolicked in the trees, its words, the most beautiful woman, and fever pricked his cheeks. He thought Jim, the street of the theater, the naked people in the stage of that theater window, crazy as Chinese opera, darn odd crazy as old Chinese opera, judo, jujitsu, Indian puzzles, and now his father's voice, dreaming off, sad, sadder, saddest, much too much to understand. And suddenly he was scared because Dad wouldn't talk about the handbill he had secretly burned. Will gazed out of the window. There, like a milkweed plume, white paper danced in the air. No, he whispered. No carnival's coming this late. It can't. He hid under the covers, switched on his flashlight, opened a book. The first picture he saw was a prehistoric reptile, trap drumming a night sky a million years lost. Heck, he thought in the rush, I got Jim's book, he's got one of mine. But it was a pretty fine reptile. And flying towards sleep, he thought he heard his father, restless, below, the front door shut. His father was going back to work late, for no reason, with brooms or books, downtown, away, away. And Mother asleep, content, not knowing he had gone.